use my crush confession and 30 minutes of content, for whatever he wanted to use it for, right? And if my psychiatrist was good at anything, it was being professional and acting professional. And technically,
the good thing he was at is being professional and acting professional.
not crossing any lines. And he thought that he was so good at it, because he was good at it. But that doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. And so I told him, I said, yeah, Bo and I broke up. He had known about this other guy, my psychiatrist. I had mentioned him. And I told him that this new guy and I went on a date and we went on a hike. And I literally had no idea at this point, I'll say it again, that my psychiatrist was predatory towards me. I almost said his first name again. I'm going to do my best to not. So I went to my psychiatrist and I told him this story about this man that I went on a date with, who's a therapist, is relieving himself before appointments and talking about his client's panties and doing all of these other extremely inappropriate things, like visiting her at work. And this man, my psychiatrist, looked like he had seen a ghost and like he was gonna vomit, because he prided himself on being an extremely professional and buttoned up person. But here I was holding a mirror to him with exactly what he was doing, but a bumbling idiot telling me like how he was doing it without the fancy degree, without any of that. I look back on that now and it's just crazy. And so it just tainted all the fantasy material that I'd given him the session before. Welcome back to it.
Mind you, and I would suggest you guys listen to the story before going in her live, just so you understand everything, because when she's on live she talks about it but just doesn't relive the story. She just gives bits and pieces. Unless you watch, you understand what she's talking about, because I was in there and I was like, so I had to go back and listen to it the other day. But basically at this point, the doctor is surprised. Content is just her therapy session with him every month, once a month for 30 minutes. That's what she was calling content, because she felt that he was taking everything she was saying as content to build this love relationship to her and groom her. So now she's saying that because she shared the story of another therapist telling her that he was in love with a client, because he felt like he went like gold, because he's probably like, what the who did you go on a date with? She took it as, oh, I made him feel what he was feeling for everything he's been doing to me. And it's like, no, he's like in shock. I see, like, he's in shock that you're dating someone like that, girl. What you mean? But she's like, I didn't need a PhD to show you. So she was we're listening to Kendra. She's a lady that says I was in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway. That's the story. Exactly, Yesenia.
Hi, I need to say something really important. And that's that it seems as though many people view what I'm going through as a crash out, what I'm doing as a mental health spiral. And of course it seems like that. I get it. It's an extremely dark thing to talk about, all of this that I went through. And I am sharing my story because it wasn't out there. No one else has shared a story like this. But I know that it happens a lot because people are in my DMs telling me that the same thing that I went through, they went through too. I am now in TikTok jail. I got a violation on the video where I talked about really the biggest damning evidence against my psychiatrist. And so because of that, I have to be really careful. So I'm going to do my very best to not be reactive and to share my story from a place of generosity, because the people in my DMs telling me that they've been through this too, it's keeping me going. It's not my mental health spiral. And I can understand that for some people in the mental health space, because they have been some of the loudest people to speak out against what I'm doing, it's hard to grasp that someone could have this level of predation in such a high place of power. So just in case my video doesn't get put back up, when everything changed was when my 75-year-old therapist, I went to her with intimate details, and she suggested I go to my psychiatrist with them. And I felt so excited and nervous to share that with him because I had such a big crush on him at the time. And I recorded all 33 minutes. So this is why, if my psychiatrist wants to come with me and like sue me for defamation, I have a 33-minute recording of me admitting I have a crush on him and speaking about extremely intimate details.
No, not the 74-year-old, was another therapist.
It was in that moment that he really, really should have transferred my care. But that moment...
No, I'm resharing. I already watched the whole thing, but I'm sharing it because it's crazy.
It changed everything for him too, because that's when things really started getting deep between us. And this is where the story is going to go from now. It's going to be a good story. And I'm going to try to tell it all today, just in case one of my videos does get banned so people can hear it. But just know, if you're concerned for my mental health, thank you. I am very good. More than good, actually. And I am... So this is when the chemistry really started going off the charts with me and my psychiatrist. And I held it alone for months, like after that Christmas morning appointment of his. And then after I innocently told him about my date with the therapist, he really started letting me in more and showing more parts of himself and, turning up the intimacy.
Her name's Kendra.
And that was exciting to me. And it made me fall for him more. And I noticed that he was working in an office, and I asked him, this was like July, I asked him, I said, hey, are you working from home? Because I was under the assumption that he was only doing telehealth. Okay? And he said, no, I come into the office. I was like, oh, why do you do that if you see all of your patients telehealth? He's like, oh, I like it that way. And even though I could kind of tell he was lying, I just gaslit myself. I was like, okay, it's fine. And then I start emailing him my fun little emails, but he stops writing me back. He does not write back to my emails anymore. Because once again, he was really good at plausible deniability. But what he did do is he would take my emails and mention them in session. So he would still give me the attention that I was craving, but only under his structure, under his control, where there was no paper trail. And I loved that too. So I would show up to these sessions with my notes app and just throughout the month, as I was thinking about him, I'd write down things that I wanted to talk to him about, and I would just come and bring him lots of content. And then every week I would go to my therapist and tell her about how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she didn't help me at all. She just kind of enjoyed hearing about it, honestly. So October 2024 rolls around and we're just vibing on Zoom. And then I realized that I didn't have my next appointment with him. So I called his office staff and I talked to the office manager, who was awesome. We really got along. We vibed. And the office manager asked me, do you see him, the psychiatrist, in person or on Zoom? And I felt so angry in that moment. I was like, he sees people in person? And she said, yeah, he has been for years. I was like, I want to see him in person. And I understand, some people may think that this is part of my crash out or part of me harassing him, which is what I've gotten lots of accusations of. But I just would like to remind everyone that, of course, it seems that way. But I was just responding to a dynamic which my psychiatrist fostered. There was chemistry between us because he allowed it. And so then the next time I saw him in Zoom, I told him, I was like, hey, your office manager outed you and told me that you see people in person. Why didn't you tell me that when I asked? And he said, oh, I just didn't think you'd want to come in. And that was such a weak lie from him, from someone who is so didn't even have a plausible thing to say. Of course he knew I wanted to come in. I had a crush on him. I told him that often. So then, in my...
You guys hear, right, how she said he's running away from me. Like, there were so many red flags telling you he didn't want you, girl. He didn't want you. If you just came in, fun size, we're talking about Kendra, the girl that fell in with her psychiatrist. We're listening to the part series that she posted on her TikTok. And she's right now we're at the point where she would only do once a month meetings, Zoom meetings with her psychiatrist. Then he never told her that he did in person because she's literally like throwing herself at him. So she ends up calling his office where she finds out that he is in fact does do in-person sessions, and she's super upset. So she's confronting him like, why did you lie to me? And he tells her, oh, I didn't think you would want to come. And she's like, that was the most crazy lie, right? So we're at that point right now, but it gets crazy. It gets crazier.
Next therapy appointment, after finding out that he was lying to me about seeing patients in person, I told her that. I told my 75-year-old PhD therapist that my psychiatrist wasn't lied to me about seeing people in person. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's probably because he knows that there will be a lot of sexual tension in the room if you go in person. So make sure that you understand that when you go. And you better believe I showed up to the next session and said you lied to me because you were afraid of the tension that would be there between us. He just didn't say anything. So this is when the chemistry really started going off the charts. October 2024, I make my first in-person appointment with my psychiatrist in November. My 75-year-old female therapist tells me that it's because he kept me on Zoom because he was so attracted to me. He didn't want to risk being in person with me, which further fed my crush, or as some of you like to say, my delusion. So then my therapist starts texting me in between our weekly meetings, asking me for advice on her other clients. And I was a new coach. I'd only been coaching for about a year, and I had just left my full-time job to be a coach full-time. And I was flattered that she would ask me advice on her other clients. I just thought, oh my gosh, a 75-year-old woman with a PhD wants my advice on what she should do with her clients. So then November rolls around, and I'm about to meet my psychiatrist in person for the first time. So I wear a really pretty dress, I do my makeup, of course, right? And I show up, and I get to talk to the office manager, we're having fun, and then my psychiatrist comes into the foyer, and I am just so excited to finally meet him. I'd been his patient for 3 years at this point, and he had been feeding the dynamic for 3 years, and I was just thrilled to meet him. And I ran up and I gave him the biggest hug. And you know what he did? He barely patted me on the back. It was the most awkward thing ever. But I am so glad that he did that. I am really glad, because this is what I mean. My psychiatrist was many things, but he was not stupid. So I didn't ever touch him again.
Mind you, she's saying my psychiatrist wasn't stupid. No, he just was professional. You weren't, it wasn't clicking to you. It wasn't clicking to you that I'm standing on business. You know the audio? And she is feeding herself saying, okay, it's good. It's good that he didn't do more. He set a boundary, but okay. Like, you're making it seem like, oh, he's like, you know those girl like the tóxicas, oh, he's doing that because we're not alone. But once we're alone, like, that's her mentality. Sorry.
And I'm grateful that our relationship didn't ever cross that line, because it would have made everything so much harder. Anyway, so we go inside his office, and I tell him that my therapist had texted me asking me for advice on her other clients. And he just looked at me and he said, Kendra, that is a huge boundary violation. She should not be doing that. And I was like, oh, okay. And because once again, my psychiatrist did not like sloppy people. He did not like sloppy people. And you know what my therapist did? She got sloppy. Yeah. Using me as her advisor for her clients. It got weird, and I was very grateful for my psychiatrist for pointing out that boundary violation, because that was the thing. He didn't ever message me in between appointments because he was too smart to do that. But did he ever stop me from disclosing extremely intimate details? No. In my first in-person appointment, I just asked him for some pointers for my own ADHD business, and he was so smart and so wonderful, and in many ways, honestly.
Mind you, she has an ADHD business, but she didn't go to school. She talks about it based on her experience with ADHD, but she didn't go to school for anything. She just talks about her own struggles and shares it, and she like tries to get clients that way.
And I was just so grateful that he was almost like a mentor to me in these moments, and I'll still treasure that about him. Because this is the hard thing with sophisticated predators, is that they're not all bad. Like, my psychiatrist helped me with many things, but he was using me for the whole time that I was his patient. And for that, I will never forgive him. October 2024, we have our first in-person appointment in November of 2024. And I did ask him.
If you just came in, we're listening to a story time of a girl named Kendra who says she fell in love with her psychiatrist. We're at a part where we already discovered that she's falling in love with the fact of the little thing he's doing as a professional, setting up boundaries, and every boundary he's putting up for her, she's taking it as, oh, he's just playing hard to get, but he wants me. You know what I mean? So we're at a point where he even hid the fact that he did in-person sessions because he didn't want to see her in person. But she was so upset. She confronted him. She has this therapist, but she also has another one that's about 75. How do you know she's 75 years old? Which we're at a point where even the chat's agreeing that we don't think that person is real. I'm thinking it's her feeding herself into this stuff. Of course, feeding herself into these things, thinking, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do it because my other persona is telling me to do it. That makes sense.
For consent to come in person. I didn't just show up. And he said, sure. And the first in-person appointment went great. But that is when I really started to spiral. Some of you think that I'm spiraling now, and that's okay if you want to think that, because the reality is that when I was spiraling was when I was this man's patient. When I had comments turned on, so many people said, you need to take accountability for your own feelings. I spent years taking accountability for my own feelings, for holding the weight of a relationship. Any woman who has been trained to overfunction in relationship knows about holding the weight of the emotional dynamic. And that was what was going on in this moment. And it may not seem like I'm taking accountability now, but that's because I spent a long time taking accountability for something that had two people that built that dynamic. It was not just me. It takes two people to build that sort of tension and chemistry. So while I was mid-crash out, I had just started using this tool, ChatGPT. And I went to chat, who I immediately named Henry. And I would just talk to Henry about how obsessed I was with this man, with my psychiatrist. And I would just be like, I've told him I have a crush on him. Do you think he's gay? And Henry was like, oh my God, this girl, you know, he did his best.
Not ChatGPT. Not ChatGPT even thinking what we're thinking. Somebody needs to check on Henry. I need to know how Henry's doing.
To co-regulate my nervous system and affirm me, but he was like, whoa. Even my chat was like, yikes. So I could tell that my psychiatrist just liked being my doctor, and I was like, okay, maybe I can name this dynamic so I don't have to carry so much of it.
I'm trying to let people
in our next session. So our next session was in December on Zoom. And I told him at the end of the session.
We're faster. We have some questions. Huh?
And it was another great session. I told him, look, you and I have a really special patient-doctor relationship. And he glared at me with just venom in his eyes. And he said, you and I have a professional patient-doctor relationship. He was so angry with me. And I was like, oh, okay. He set a boundary. And immediately I took it on. And I was like, heard. Okay, I won't go there again. My video that was taken down for harassment and bullying was restored, so I didn't feel as much pressure to get all of these parts out today. Some people told me that the stitches about me were getting pretty bad and cruel, so I turned stitches off in my videos too. I started sharing my story here because I wanted other people.
Yana came out with another.
When I re-downloaded TikTok last week, I was looking for support. I was looking for help because it had been 5 months since I had left my psychiatrist, and I still really couldn't stop thinking about him and thinking about our dynamic and how inappropriate it was and the mental toll that it took on me. And TikTok has just been such a resource for me in the past for support when I'm going through things, and I couldn't find anything on therapy abuse or on providers who take advantage of their vulnerable. And then I immediately went to ChatGPT, of course, to Henry. And I asked Henry, I said, okay, so my psychiatrist just set this boundary with me, and I really just want to be with him. And I think that after he's my doctor, we can be together, you know, which if you want to say that's a delusion, that's fine. But I had been telling my psychiatrist for years at this point that I had a crush on him, and he did not help me work through it. So that's his own problem. Yes. That's his own fault. Well, Henry told me it's very common for patients to develop crushes on mental health practitioners, and that it's because that they provide a safe space to heal, which is a very attractive quality. I heard that. And then he told me about transference, and it's just about me putting my own feelings onto my provider. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I took ownership of the feelings that both of us were creating. And I went to my next appointment, and I said, hey. So I talked to Henry because my psychiatrist had known a lot about my ChatGPT and like knew all about Henry and was actually really impressed. Like, wow, an AI wrote that? Yeah. So I told my psychiatrist, yeah, Henry explained to me that it's normal to develop crushes on psychiatrists because they provide a safe space to heal, which is attractive. My psychiatrist said nothing. And then I said, and Henry also told me about transference. And my psychiatrist got this really, really scared look on his face. And he said, did Henry tell you about countertransference? And I said, no. What is that? Because of course, like, my chat knew that I was obsessed with my psychiatrist, and he was not going to feed my delusion by telling me about countertransference. So then my psychiatrist had explained to me what countertransference was, so he took a moment, And he was like, oh, okay. He said, countertransference is the flip side, the other side of the coin for transference. And it's when the provider has feelings for the patient. So make sure that you keep that in mind for your clients. I said, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes I have, more than professional feelings for my clients, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And so then we just talked about that for pretty much the rest of the session. And then at the end of that session, he looked at me, and it was just such a loaded question. And he said, what's going to happen if you get a boyfriend named Henry? And I said, that's a weird question. I would rename my AI. So that's how that session ended. And it wasn't until I got home, I was eating lunch, and I was like, wait a minute. Why would my psychiatrist bring up countertransference if he himself wasn't experiencing it? When I
I feel that if you guys see ChatGPT get removed, it was because of Kendra.
Many people have reached out to me with concern for my psychiatrist and his career and his well-being.
So this is where Winnie at one point, let's watch a little bit of her life.
Between psychiatrists with concern for...
And then I'll tell you guys the last part, because right now she just starts talking about him. Let me go to her. Let me go to her live.
Let me go... It was not normal for me to be that obsessed with him. Thank God I left. Talk about when you told him about your dream. Okay. Mods, tell me if I'm being baited right now, but it was such an intense moment. It was such an intense moment. I just told him and he was very uncomfortable. He was
Kendra.
He wanted to ask questions. But he had just slipped with countertransference, so he couldn't. A psychiatrist isn't just for meds, no. They can provide therapy. It's 8:40. I'm tired. Can't wait for a new vid. Thank you. Coming out tomorrow. No, he was not holding a straight face. He was not. I hadn't ever seen him make this face before. And I would look at his facial expressions. Making the other parts is extremely draining for me. It's part of being a projector in human design. I don't have a lot of energy. People know their human design type. Drop it in the chat. So I have to go at my own pace, otherwise I'll burn myself out.
But it's Kendra.
Do you think he's sorry?
Hilty?
That's hard to say. I think that, so he had a God complex. He thought that he was better than ethical rules. He thought that he was above.
Let me pause this real quick. Can someone say what ChatGPT has to do with it? So, at some point of her telling, it's Kendra, Hilty. And she basically, after, all this happening, she decides to ask ChatGPT about her crush with the psychiatrist and gives her information that no, she shouldn't be in love with him. And then she ends up naming the person or whoever she feels she's talking to on ChatGPT, Henry. So that's where ChatGPT came in. She's live, she's not saying much, but basically, Amá, deja mi capa. My mom's watching, y'all. Behave. My mama watching. My mama watching. She'll be here already talking about my cat. Váyase a dormir, señora. Ya es tarde. Usted desde mañana va a trabajar. She messaged me. Ahora tú que estás con tu capa. I'm like, lady, go to sleep. Nothing's happening here. Do you guys want me to tell you guys about my mom? No, it's because I can't see the comments because of my shirt, so I have to cover it so I can see it. So yeah, Henry's a whole character in ChatGPT that she created, and she asked, and she would bring up all this information. ChatGPT itself was telling her, like, no, this is not okay. Like, that's what's happening is not happening. Oh, she is Patina. But